the whole idea of it was that it was drums and bass with space for like an MC toasting on top or like a singer. And once there were all these massive mid-range lead riffs and stuff, you're like, nah, that's not even the same music.
Yeah, the vibes is coming. Oh, love it. Oh yeah, we're traveling.
I didn't even know what Bristol was. You know, I'd never been there. I had no need to go there because in London, you're just like, well, this is the centre of everything.
Hear my rhythm and I hear that sound. Play this rhythm and I play that sound. Them kind of you, them are the talk of the town. It's a natural way the crowd boogie down. I hear that, hear that.
Oh, I'd love to just go to Ibiza and be a raver at some house club. Totally different scenario where you can just be a punter and have a good time. But yeah, there's just never that space in the diary to kind of get that done.
Hear my rhythm and I hear that sound. Yeah, we're traveling. Play this rhythm and I play that sound. Them kind of you, them are the talk of the town. It's a natural way the crowd moving down. I hear that, hear that.
Hello and welcome to a brand new episode of the One More Thing podcast. I'm Dave Columbo Jenkins, and this is where I pick the minds of some of electronic music's most inspiring and interesting artists. Right now, we're chatting to Break. A veritable whirlwind since he emerged 20 years ago, he is regarded as one of drum and bass music's premiership artists, both technically and musically. His new album, Digital World, is a great snapshot of this status, and it's one of those rare full dance floor albums that works just as well at home as it does smashing up a club, which is good because he's been doing a fair bit of that recently with the coveted XOYO Residency in London, which is around about the time I caught up with him in mid-May 2023. So stick around as we cover an epic range of topics, from his first ever international gig to us starting a van driving company and everything in between. But first, we salute an absolute legend. Break, how are you doing? Thank you for joining me on this podcast, man.
I'm good, thanks for having me here. It's sort of Monday, so we're sort of off the weekend but fresh in for the week, so it's a nice day. So I'm feeling kind of positive this morning.
Go on, cool. Are you a Monday man anyway, or Mondays how are you on a normal Monday?
I guess it depends on the weekend, doesn't it? But I'm not too bad these days. To be honest, if you DJ on a Saturday, Sunday you're kind of travelling home, and then you didn't get your Sunday to chill. So sometimes you're like, Monday's a write-off. I need that Sunday a day late. But if you DJ on Friday, I think Monday you're nice to get back on it.
Definitely. And we're going to get back onto your weekend because you're recently doing, at the time of recording, you're doing your XOYO residency, but there's loads more stuff I want to ask you first. I want to go right the way back to the start, but first, because a lot of these podcasts I've started with a quote from a previous interview, and there were numerous quotes of previous interviews that we could have done, but I wanted to do something different with this one because it's still relatively recent. But I wanted to start with a little bit of a big up, really, and just send some love to Singing Fats. Because he's a voice. You are an artist who I really associate with his voice, alongside A-Sides as well, really. Some of the most consistent producers who've ever worked with him, and some of your biggest tracks, or some of my favorite tracks of yours, feature him. So I wanted to start just with a moment of reflection and just love for Singing Fats, really, I think, if you don't mind starting with that.
Of course. Yeah, it's a big one to take in. And, like you said, I've worked with him for a long time, and even my first gig abroad was with Fats, which
but
a lot of people don't know, and it was just me, A-Sides and Fats went to Germany, and that was my first international booking.
Take me back there then.
Well, it's probably something like 2002 or something like that, and those two were just characters, to travel with, chatting all the sort of air hostesses and just always on sort of chatting people up and kind of having a laugh. Obviously they're kind of like two old mates, so that it was just like they're just doing their thing, and you're like, these two are hilarious. And obviously to be able to have Fats on the mic for your first show, I mean, I've done a lot of shows after that, and you don't always get that kind of level of MC on gigs.
Wow.
So yeah, just to have that on my first show is like mad. And so that's kind of, I'd met him maybe before that, but that was, yeah, so I have known him for a long time, and he was one of my favourites as a kind of young raver getting tape packs. He was always stood out on tape packs, just because of his style and the singing.
Yeah,
it was just different and cut through, and you could instantly know it was him. And so yeah, like you said, a lot of those early tunes that I bought was things like Crazy with him, A-sides and Fats, which was a massive tune. I heard that down the end. That was a big tune when I was about probably 17, 18. So yeah, always wanted to work with him. And then when I got the chances over the years, it was always, like a real special, occasion to kind of get him on a tune. And I think we got on really well and kind of agreed a lot on stuff musically and had a lot of similar taste in music. And I think that kind of helped to kind of gel what we did together. Obviously, it's kind of like bittersweet news in that sense, because you want to celebrate what he did. Obviously, it's super sad that will never happen again, and he's gone. And at least with this, our tune, Natural Way, he got to see it come out and saw the reaction of everyone sort of last year in the summer, where it was, it was a really big tune, and definitely one of the favourites from the album, So I'm glad at least he got to see it come out and do its thing.
Yeah.
It was a really good, last one for us to do.
Go on. That's beautiful. That's beautiful. He was a real songwriter, wasn't he? I mean, he came from a whole other musical world, a whole other musical generation. He's another generation on top of us. Maybe even two, really. He came from the real roots. What did you learn from him as a songwriter?
I guess he had that attitude of like, if there's a vibe, I'll catch a vibe. And if there ain't, I won't. So he kind of, and they would, you'd send him a tune, you'd just be like, nah, I'm just not really feeling it. And some people would, and I get that. Sometimes you'd be like, oh, I'm all offended, or like, but with him, it wasn't really anything. It was just like, I'm in or I'm out. And everyone knows that. He was pretty cut and dry about things. And, but in a way, it saves time, and you kind of knew he wasn't negative, he was just honest.
Yeah.
And so I think that, that's how we kind of, we ditched tunes that weren't good enough, or he wasn't really feeling it, or I wasn't feeling it. And I think that helped just for the quality control. And, he'd say, he'd freestyle vibes on the track, and that's what would come out. Obviously there was a writing process to it as well,
but that initial seed, that initial kind of first idea would always come from a jam, from a vibe then, really. And then... I
think so. I mean, sadly I never got to be in the studio with him for recordings.
Whoa.
Yeah, so all of
now, when I think about tracks, like We Are the People or something like that, I'm imagining, that track in particular, I get goosebumps when I just think about it, but I imagine the three of you, along with Cleveland as well, all together in the studio. I always imagine any recording with everybody in the studio, even though the likelihood is that it's not, but that didn't happen then. That never happened.
No, it never happened. I think mainly because of his health and just not being mobile. I mean, there was time, that one of the things that really bugs me was that I always wanted to reach down to his and do a recording with him there. And I never did. And you're like, oh, I just kicked myself for not making it up there sooner. But we always made it work with how he did it. I helped him over the years, sort out his recording chain and, just give him some tips on recording at home. But there's other singers that do that. And I think that if they're, you kind of want them to be comfortable. If they're comfortable doing it that way and they deliver the goods, then I'm not going to stick my oar in and mess up the flow.
No.
So I think with that one, probably Cleveland probably did his bit in his studio, I'd imagine, and they'd put it together, I think, in Logic a little bit to combine their vocals. But but Fats would edit himself down quite a lot as well, and occasionally I'd sneakily find bits in the audio bin in the sort of session he'd send me, because he'd delete stuff, and I'd be like, "Is there anything else?" And you'd find a few bits in the audio bin, and I'd throw them in, and he'd be like, "Where'd you get that? That's wicked." And you're like, "Mate, you deleted it."
Go on.
But I think he knew what he wanted it to sound like, so he'd get his bit down and record it and be like, "There you go, that's it."
Right.
So yeah, luckily we'd get ones and they'd work out. But there's a few here I've got that never went past the final stage, where he wasn't quite happy, I wasn't quite happy, and we'd just be like, "Nah, no big deal, leave it. If it's not happening, no stress, there'll be another one."
Yeah, I like that. I think that there's no urgency then. It's a lot more natural in that type of way. And you refer to him as cut and dry man. I would say my limited interactions with you and what I know about you, you're a cut and dry man as well, aren't you? I think
pretty much. I'd strive to be as lashing as him, or have the confidence to just shut. I'm a little bit more diplomatic maybe, but I think, I'd like to be. I think as you probably get older as well, you just get more confident in your own opinion, and you kind of, what you like and what you don't like. But I mean, I'd never carry on with something I didn't like, and there was tunes, with him that I wasn't feeling too much as well, and we both were able to kind of, say our bit and get on with it.
Yeah, and move on.
Yeah,
let's go back to those, like that really kind of early time, and especially it's really interesting that your first international gig then was with A-Sides as well, because your first release was on East Side, wasn't it, on his label? And you must have been a teenager, like around about this time. You're probably about, 18, 19 or something?
Early 2000s? Yeah, 18, 19. I think I signed it and probably came out the year afterwards. And it doesn't seem like now everyone's young, but that back then people were always like, "Wow, you're so young. I can't believe you get." So it was more of a thing being a bit younger then, whereas now it's like, I don't know, like 14-year-olds have got some massive tune out. But and I think same thing was like, back then you didn't have access to learn the stuff by that age, because there wasn't really YouTube tutorials and stuff like that. So but I was also pretty clueless. And you realise how much you just kind of had to teach yourself and wing it a bit. And that tune, that he first put out, I just made it all in a sampler. So there was no mixing desk or anything. So he actually was like, "Look, let me run it through my studio, A-Sides, and I'll run it through the desk, put some outboard gear on it." And so he just helped get a nice little mix on it, because it was just all made in the sampler.
Wow. So literally all just made in there. So you could just play it straight off the sampler.
I just brought the sampler up there. Exactly. Just play it straight off the sampler. If you had the MIDI, the kind of Cubase project, and
wow,
yeah, that was it.
Go on. How delightfully old school. What led you down that path then anyway? What was it that kind of triggered that curiosity at such a young age? Because this was the dawning of the time when you did start to have younger people coming through, because around about the same time in my ends in Cardiff, Lincoln High Contrast was coming through. Who was probably a couple of years older than you, but again, like late teens, early 20s, and it was big news. So this was like the start of a new generation really coming through. But what led you to this point?
I mean, really, I wanted to be a scratch hip-hop DJ. So that was the first thing I'd seen where I was like, wow, I'm getting decks. I was into hip-hop. I wasn't even really into drum and bass by that point, and I was just into hip-hop. And I did that, for a few years, and practiced a lot on scratching and all the turntablist stuff.
Can you still scratch now?
I can, but, not massively great. You'll never forget the little moves, but I've probably got crusty, like arthritic, nearly fingers now. You got to have nimble fingers for all that crab, crossfader stuff. But no, I still love, I still love all that. And, but there wasn't much mixing involved, so that's when I got into, I was into garage and house and garage and jungle drum and bass at that point, and I had to sort of pick which genre to fill up my record box with, because you couldn't keep going and buying 4 garage tunes, 4 drum and bass tunes, and afford to kind of do that on vinyl. So I was kind of like really torn between kind of garage and jungle drum and bass at that point, and then I went with drum and bass, and that's where I started DJing and thought, you know, I want to make tunes as well. So it just kind of led from early DJing and just, you know, messing about making music, wanting to chop up amens basically.
What was the link with Jason A-Sides then? How did you end up in his studio?
I met him through some guys called Social Security, who were some guys from Tottenham who just heard my tunes in Camden when I was playing some stuff to some guys in a record store, and they're like, oh, I reckon A-Sides will like these tunes. So they kind of took me up there one day when they went up to his house, and yeah, I played him some tunes, and he was like, yeah, I like these, I'd like to sign them to Eastside.
Wow.
So it was kind of like a random encounter, but you know, I hung out with those guys afterwards and we did some tunes and stuff, and it was same thing, just people meeting each other who want to, you know, get some tunes going basically.
Yeah.
But I'd been at it for a while, you know, by that point, but just didn't know the right people really. I knew some guys from various other record shops and other, you know, labels like that who were kind of interested, but A-Sides was the most established guy, you know, that I met. And he was just really generous enough to kind of obviously put my tunes out, but to link me with other people like Clute and Marcus Intellects, and he was just generous of like, yeah, I'll check these guys out. Brilliant. Link me up. And it was, you know, some people lock you down and want to kind of just get all your tunes and put them out, but he was cool, you know, to be like, hey, you should speak to these guys, send him some tunes, and kind of, yeah, just really helped me out at that point, I guess.
That's amazing. And that all came about then through you effectively playing your records to somebody then, or playing your tunes to somebody in a record shop. What a chance encounter.
Off mini disc.
Brilliant. Another delightfully old school kind of story. But this was around the time where it was still really, really tribal. And when you met people, it's different now. Just everything's different because of the connectivity and stuff. But when you found someone who was into the same sort of stuff as you, were on that same type of vibe and had a similar mission, you connected over these type of things. It really did kind of create these type of friendship groups in that way, didn't it?
Yeah, you're right. And I think there was almost, like you said, it was a bit more tribal. It was more underground in that sense of like, kind of people have got to help each other out. And there wasn't this world of internet to kind of help you through everything where you'd post stuff up or look at videos, how to do it, or get hits on your, you know, now you'd be posting that clip up on Instagram or something and you'd be getting stream, you know, it's so you had to kind of take it a bit into your own hands and kind of just get out there a bit, and kind of get lucky a little bit as well. Yeah,
definitely. And that's certainly a kind of case of luckiness, but that opened the doors then. I mean, like you mentioned, Commercial Suicide, there was also Subtitles as well, those first couple of years. And I think because that first release on Eastside was 2003, so we are currently in the 20th year of Break at the moment, which you've not made any type of song and dance, but you've got an album.
I didn't even know until another interviewer told me that a couple of months ago, and I was like, I hadn't even clocked it. And it's a bit depressing, that numbers, it's a big number, so I was like, oh my god.
Does it feel like 20 years?
Yes and no. There's times where it's been a long old slog, and you're like, there's a lot of hours have gone in, there's a lot of late nights and missions around the world, but obviously that's great as well. And it's almost when you stop and start looking back at things, you're like, wow, that was a while back. Or even seeing some old photos and things like that, and you're like, Jesus. But I think, like with anyone in their life, you get into little either rat races or little kind of loops, and you're just doing your thing and you just kind of lose track of time, don't you? And
massively.
Yeah, a decade will just like disappear.
Yeah. Well, I got blown away because I was trying to think of the first time that I was requested an interview from you. And at the time, you were the hardest person to get hold of. There was, it was around the release of the Symmetry album, your debut album.
Right.
2008. I was working in Bristol for IDJ magazine, and I knew you were around. Like, I knew you were in the city and stuff like that, and I would see you play and stuff like that. And Bristol was thriving at the time. We'll get on to Bristol in a minute. But when it came to interviews, Laurence from Electric, the PR, was like, she tried. Well, she told me that she tried lots of times, but I was really persistent. I was like late 20s, working on a magazine, starting to get some clout in terms of who I could put in the magazine. And my thing was drum and bass. It was like, this drum and bass just isn't in the magazines at the moment. And I was really, really trying. And Symmetry came out and blew me away. But yeah, you were impossible to interview. You were a very elusive character, and it blew me away that was 15 years ago, because that's pretty much the
Wow.
scope of my professional career. Like, there was years before that as well. I've been doing this similar amount of time as you.
Mm.
But that didn't feel like 15 years. I went straight back to, I can remember the desk. I can even remember the promo CDs that I had piled up on my desk and everything.
Wow.
And I can remember conversations I was having with Laurence, and she was like, no, he's just not up for interviews. It's not his thing at the moment. He just wants the music to do the talking. And I would try almost every month to request for about 6 months around about that time. So where were you in 2008 then? What memories does that bring up to you?
Not many, because there was just so much weeds getting smoked. And that's
Brilliant.
probably what you encountered there, was just sort of like, I mean, I remember Laurence, but I don't remember Laurence hitting me up going, hey, I mean, yeah, I don't remember repeatedly turning down interviews, to be honest. But yeah, I wasn't massively into doing stuff like that. I mean, we would do things with, did you say it was iDJ you were with? Yeah, and I do remember doing stuff with them and kind of, and obviously Knowledge Mag, and I think I did do interviews and photo shoots and things with them. But yeah, I mean, I've never been massively into that stuff. Also, that time was still a point where like you actually could let the music do the talking, because you could actually still shift a few units on vinyl and stuff. And it wasn't like the music's irrelevant. You've just got to big yourself up to try and get popular, to get some gigs and make some money, which is where it's sort of kind of, gone down that road a bit more now, because sales and even streams, it's just, it's hard to just be in it to make music, basically. So I think at that stage I was a bit more just like, hey, I don't need to do any of that. I've got tunes, and I don't know, it's probably more that kind of attitude.
And why not as well? That was the allure for me, the inaccessibility, the fact that I had to really try hard. Interviews didn't happen easily. I think there was still quite a lot of distrust towards the more mainstream dance music press as well,
Right.
From drum and bass, because there was a general feeling that the journalists didn't really kind of understand it and didn't really get the culture and hadn't supported it consistently. So a lot of artists were like, well, why should I bother? You're only jumping on this because it's a hype thing. And it took years with certain artists, and certain peers of yours, to build up any type of rapport or trust. But that was exciting for me, because that was the challenge. It wasn't easy to get hold of interviews with drum and bass artists in the mainstream music media. And that was really exciting for me to be able to try and do that. And it was a challenge. And you did have to kind of, just as you would in drum and bass anyway, earn your stripes in that type of way. Like, nobody was just going to give you the time for nothing, if you know what I mean.
I mean, I definitely didn't have the clout at that point to be aloof. I think it was more just like head in the clouds and sort of, just didn't really want didn't want the limelight. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. But I get your point, and I didn't really know that there was that much of a, like you said, distrust or kind of, skepticism about the kind of media at that point.
Yeah, certainly speaking to like people like Darren, D-Bridge and Dom and Roland, they were, two like in a similar field to yourself, that I would be tapping up all of the time, just like, nah, not feeling it.
Okay.
And it took years. And Darren explained to me years and years later, he was like, what did he say? He was like, because most journalists are using music as a stepping stone, and they'll go on to do a travel thing or political journalist, or much more better paying and higher profile and glamorous, if you like. And he's like, you've been doing this for so long, like, it's okay now. I'll give you time, because you're not going to be, you're not using me as a stepping stone, and I know that, so it's fine.
Okay.
And I know that you know my music. And I think there was just a general, there was Knowledge Mag, and ATM and stuff like that. Like, there was already an established media for drum and bass. So why bother using one that isn't quite the same, isn't part of that community in that type of way, I think. Really.
Got you.
But it was an exciting time. Like, that time, I think you'd only really just started to establish yourself in Bristol. When did you move to Bristol? So it was around about that time, I think, wasn't it?
I think it was it 2000 and sort of 5, 6, something like that. So yeah, that album was, I hadn't been there that long by that point when that first album came out. And it was like a fun kind of world's your oyster kind of period. You left home, you're in a new city, you're making tunes, stuff's going down well. And it was pretty chilled and just fun times. And rent was cheap back then, so it was just it was an easy situation, and it was just fun. So I do miss that kind of the sort of fun days where you didn't have much to worry about.
Yeah, totally. How does Bristol compare now? Really, in that way, like Bristol's become Bristol. People move there now for the drum and bass scene, but you moved there because friends were there. I think it was Fierce who convinced you to move to Bristol, I think, if I recall.
Yeah, I mean, he was from a similar part of London as me, so he wasn't obviously originally from Bristol, but he knew people up here for quite a few years, so I think he had a good link with friends, and I think he brought Di around my mum's house when I was still living at my mum's, and I was like, wow, Di's in my house. And that he was the first Bristol guy I met, pretty much, because in London I didn't even know what Bristol was. I'd never been there. I had no need to go there, because in London you're just like, well, this is the center of everything. So you just have that attitude. So I was pretty clueless about Bristol, but even at that point, obviously London was just insanely expensive, and to get your own place, it was just tough. So that was it was kind of Brighton or Bristol were the two kind of places where you're like, you can still get back to London. They've got good nightlife and good creative kind of vibes as a city. But going up there with Fierce, and I started getting gigs there as well, so I DJ'd there and really enjoyed the club sort of scene. And it was a bit of a punt, but I think based on the kind of history, and obviously I kind of learnt a bit more, and obviously like two of my favourite bands were Massive Attack and Portishead, and I knew that's how I kind of knew about Bristol, and I thought, well, if they've made that music there must be something in the air. Do you know what I mean? And obviously I've made a lot of music along those veins as well, so that was another thing that drew me to Bristol, was like that whole trip hop and that kind of side of things. So it just felt
still only, I guess, like that was still only like 10 years old at the time, really. Like that was still the ramifications or the ripples and tremors of that huge explosion throughout the 90s was still being felt even at that time in Bristol, weren't they, in the mid 2000s? Like that was still recent history. Now it's like, kind of part of like a deeper musical history again now because of the sands of time. But back then that was still really relevant. There was still a lot of active people from that time who were still doing that then, wasn't there?
There was, and I sadly didn't really kind of get into meeting any of those people. I wasn't really involved in that scene in Bristol, but I guess it was a different crew and a different world of stuff, and really at that stage I was just the D&B was kicking off, so it was that was where a lot of focus was on that. But it's like you said, it was probably trip hop was still a genre that was actually happening at that point. So it was it made life kind of easy at that point to kind of just DJ, make tunes, hang out, not worry too much. You could one or two gigs, and obviously I wasn't getting paid loads for gigs, but it didn't matter because the rent was cheap and you could kind of get by quite easily. And I didn't do uni or any of that stuff, so I just kind of went straight from those early releases you talked about to kind of being on the road and making tunes.
Wow, okay. So
I had some other jobs in between, like bar jobs and coffee shops and stuff like that when I was kind of 18, 19, just to kind of get by. But I think when I moved to Bristol, that was the point when I just went full music.
Wow. So you really haven't, your whole life has been music then. In terms of kind of career wise, there haven't been any other kind of roles or anything besides those kind of early teenage or late teenage jobs.
Exactly.
What was the last job, non-musical job that you had then?
I think it was in a pub, working the bar in a pub. I think that was the last one, and that was just down in Hammersmith on the river. And I think that was, and kind of stuff went down, and when you kind of like argue with your boss and you're sort of like, I'm done with this. And I think that was the last one, unless it was, I did a call center, that might have been afterwards. And that was, that was like soul destroying.
I get a shiver when I think of call centers now, and I imagine it way worse now with the way things are and the way the companies treat staff now. I mean, they were awful back in the day, and I made a promise I'd never work in an office and all of this type of stuff after working in a call center for a bit. But that
was the only kind of officey job I ever had, really, was that call center. And it was, it's, you just know it. Yeah, I knew that was not for me, that that world.
What do you think would have been for you if you hadn't have been sucked into this musical world? What other occupations could you ever foresee yourself doing? Or when the chips have been down and things have been really hard, and you've just thought, oh, fuck this, I'm quitting music. What would you, if you could just train for anything, any skill, any trade or anything like that now, and you were given the time and the space and the resources to do that, what would you do?
Well, I'll go in two parts of that, because the answer to the first one I now wouldn't do, which is initially then probably photography. And I'd had an opportunity. My godfather was a photographer, and he'd invited me to go to America and be like his lackey assistant.
Wow.
And I think it was just around the time when I was just getting these tunes, 16, 17. And so I was really torn then as well, of like, oh, do I go and do that? But I have to leave this music thing. And that was a little choice. And it was, I kind of hardly knew him anyway. So it was a bit of a kind of random offer.
Yeah.
I kind of think maybe it would have been, it would have been a whole different life, you know, if I'd done that. But now,
like completely no other trace elements of what you do now would have existed at that stage.
Maybe not.
So it would have been a completely different life. What type of photographer was he then?
He was a fashion photographer.
Wow. So yeah, completely like a parallel world with the music world in that type of way. It still would have been a crazy life.
Yeah.
But,
I mean, it would have been creative, and who knows what would have happened. But yeah, that never really, you know, took off. But I've always, enjoyed photography and photos and that sort of stuff. But obviously nowadays it's just such a harder gig with camera phones, you know, filters, all the stuff that's happened, you know, since. Obviously there's still amazing photographers but I think to try now to be a photographer is a lot harder than if you're established already.
Yeah.
So like you said, I mean, I thought about that stuff when COVID happened and we all lost all our gigs and it was looking pretty bleak. And to be honest, I actually probably would end up doing some sort of driving job, because I enjoy driving anyway for gigs. I've always loved cars, racing, all that kind of stuff. And if I was a delivery driver, I could probably deal with that. I think the bit that looks the worst from what I see is they have to route round the van for like half an hour to find all the parcels. That's the bit. So maybe like a limo driver, you know, like a kind of like high-end car service or something. I could see doing that.
Oh man, that's really funny, because we have a running joke, me and my missus, of like, you know, whenever the chips are down for me, it's like, right, fuck this, I'm gonna go back to driving a van. And my last job was driving a van, and I was a removal man and driver's mate and all these type of, like, you know, driving jobs. And I still, you know, when times get hard, I do think, like, and I sometimes, you know, see a delivery guy and just think, yeah, you got the open road and the tunes on.
That's it.
But then, you know, my partner reminds me, she's like, you were always really angry when you were a van driver. You were road raged up. You were frustrated. You weren't in the right place and stuff. But I would, if I wasn't doing this, I would be driving a van as well. Like if things get really shit for both of us at the same time, fancy starting like some type of logistic.
I'm down, mate. But it can't be London, because like you said, my road rage in London was just like next level, and that was in a car, not even really, you know, trying to get places, that in a rush. And that's why I guess something like Scottish Highlands van driver, that's, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Or in Wales as well.
Or Wales.
Are there any gigs that you get and locations where it's just like, yeah, go on, you're just as excited about the drive there as you are the actual gig itself?
There are a few. Like I did it recently, Shrewsbury.
Yeah.
You can dip into Wales and then go, and I'll go on a bit of a detour just to do the Black Mountains and just go through that whole bit.
Driving up just through Wales in general.
Yeah, I love driving through Wales, man.
I think I'm still experiencing the kind of the benefits of coming out of COVID and still doing long drives now. I still relish long journeys a hell of a lot more than I was. I think I took it for granted. Right. And it'd be a bit like, oh, I got to drive to Essex, or I got to drive Milton Keynes, or wherever you're going that day, that week, or whatever. And there was a little bit of like, kind of about it before, but now, even now, like, we're well out of COVID times now. It seems like a dim and distant memory, thank fuck. But
Yeah.
I'm still really loving a good drive, and I'll, weigh up taking the train and getting some work done on the train, or if I can drive, and just having a little bag of sweets beside you and your tunes on, as long as there's no bad traffic. And
well, this is it, man. Yeah, it's just the traffic, and if it's just M4 average speed camera sort of journey, they're just annoying. But yeah, getting those chances to get on some A roads, and if you've got a hotel maybe, and you don't have to get straight to the gig, you can just enjoy the drive. It's like, that's my day, just to get up to that place and enjoy it. It's and it's all it was always this thing where like there were these train DJs, and I was always like, how are you don't even have a car and you're a DJ? For years that baffled me. And they're like, I just get a train to gigs, and I never got that. And I do, it's nice to occasionally get the train, you get your laptop out, you just chill, you don't have to concentrate. It's nice, I get the thing. But yeah, I always felt from early on, like driving, DJs, cars, that's services, that's the whole that's the game.
Of the culture.
Yeah.
How are you with touring anyway? Like, I always think of something that Marky once said, and it's like, he's not paid to play, he's paid to take flights. That's where that's what his fee covers. He loves playing, but it's the traveling, the time away from family, time away from home, time in airport lounges. I mean, the UK driving around is one thing, but then international touring. How are you with that? And are you selective over where you fly now?
Yeah, I am. I mean, I went through phases where I think like early on I did what I could. Then I got a bit bad with flying. I don't know what it was. I got nervy with flying for a few years, so I was just like a bad flyer for a bit. But then I got over that, and I was fine. But it was.
What do you think triggered that then?
Yeah, I don't know. I didn't even have like a savage plane incident or anything like that. There wasn't like a super bad flight. I think I did read a book. I can't remember what I think it's called Airframe. I think it's a Michael Crichton book. And I'm not a massive reader, but that was a book I read which was all about air crash investigations. And one of them ones where you're like, I know way too much now, and it kind of you're like, I wish I'd never read that. I don't even think I finished it because it was just like, this is all. But I think it's a bit of that when you kind of know too much and you just start overthinking things. And
being on your own, like touring on your own, and all that time in your head where you're just sitting there in lounges, waiting around, delays and stuff.
And I think it's weed again. That was really another just pranging out. You'd always be like, right, I'll quickly blaze a zoo in the car park before I get in the airport. And then you're all pranged out on the plane, and I wonder why. But so that's probably part of it too. But I mean, I did like the States when I was quite young, and it was like a great time, but it was also like really hit and miss, the tour, and I think that put me off the States for quite a while. Also, just because I did that one without a visa, and you could still do that, but also that was the vinyl days, so you had to take this vinyl with you, but pretend that you're just like going to your mate's house to hang out. So for quite a few
I always
years,
take my records with me on holiday.
So for quite a few years, I was just like, look, if I'm not going to get this $2,000 visa, it's just kind of not worth doing that whole thing. And there's, the scene would be up and down there. There was always some really good spots, where they've had strong nights for years or decades, but I guess it was just easier to fly to France or like Holland and just do an hour flight and do the gigs there. So but yeah, it's one of the blessings of the job is to have been able to go to places you never would have afforded to go, or probably had time to kind of go to, like Japan or Australia, New Zealand. I'm super lucky to have got booked to go out to places like that.
and be made to feel welcome as well. You're not a tourist, and I think that's a massive difference. Like even if you could afford to go to these places, you wouldn't meet the people that you do and be connected with the communities there. And
that's
you know, whenever, especially if you're away for an extended period of time, people are really keen to make you feel at home. You know, that's it. Like, and you know, especially probably in that first 10 years of your career, when you look back at your 20s now, it's still really young and you don't really know what's going on. And to have those people take you under their wing, I can think of people in America and like in the Far East as well, where they knew that you were away from home and they'd really make an effort to kind of look after you, isn't it?
Yes, it's true. I mean, that happened in America. We stayed with a guy called Mayhem, Anthony. And, you know, he was well sound. We were just in his house hanging out, you know, took us out to sort of like hip hop nights in Atlanta. You know, I never would have done that if I was just a random tourist like in town. Yeah. So, yeah, like you said, that's one really cool benefit is you've got these locals. Even like you said, Marky, when I went to Sao Paulo to be taken round by Marky, he knows all the spots, knows where to go. It's a different, you know, you just wouldn't do that on your own as a tourist. So yeah, you're right. It's a real lucky setup to have, and it's not even just it's some guy. It's like it's a D&B head who kind of, like you said, is in the same culture, probably similar age and similar kind of vibe, and yeah. So that part of traveling, I love it. Yeah, like you said, like Marky said, it's all the boring stuff that's or the grueling sat on a plane jammed in, you know, for sort of 18 hours or something. It's like nobody enjoys that really. So it's and a lot of it is also, even though it can be a blessing having those people, there's times where maybe if you're on a tour and you've done 4 cities and then you've got to meet people and have a dinner and kind of just be friendly and chat, it's just sometimes you're just like, I'm just shattered, and it's hard to kind of be sociable when you've just been social a lot. And I always make the effort to do it because I think these people, if they paid you to come out, they're excited to see you. I know there's other DJs just like, nah, take me to the hotel, and they just don't even get involved. But
you feel a bit guilty then, don't you? You feel a bit rude doing that.
I do,
even though anyone would respect that kind of request. If people need to chill out before the gig, the main thing is that they've invested in your performance, and if you don't feel you can give a good perperformance without having that time on your own. But yeah, there's always that kind of feeling of like, you know, I don't know, it's almost feel guilty, I think, really not getting involved if people invite you to, but it does drain a lot of your energy. I think
it depends how busy the show's going to be. If you know they're making bucks and it's sold out, you probably are like, meh, they'll be all right. But when it's a small show and you're like, they're just, you know, doing it out of love, and it's you know, they've put a load on the line to kind of get that show happening, you kind of feel, I want to be part of it with them and kind of and hang out for a bit. But yeah, I think, you know, Marky's right. It's the travel is what you're really getting paid to do. And obviously there's a lot more to it than that. You've got your bag of tunes that no one else has got, and that's what you're bringing, you know, to the event. But it is, other than, you could almost say that bit's it doesn't feel like a job. You're like, that's fun, and it's
that's actually probably closer to the actual quote that he gave me, really, right there. Like, you know, obviously people are paying, but I mean, on the subject of Marky, that must have been amazing being taken around Sao Paulo by the man. Like, that was probably what, like in the early part of your career as well. So
no, not at all. That was quite recently. So even though I'd done a lot of traveling, I'd never been to South America till it was just before COVID, so it was probably something like 2019. Yeah, it wasn't that long ago. So yeah, I'd never been to South America, and always wanted to go. But like we said, unless there was a gig, or you're shelling out for a proper trip, you know, I wasn't going to be there. So I was just lucky enough Marky got me there. And that's all I've done, is just gone in and out to Sao Paulo. I know there's other D&B stuff going on in South America that I'd love to go out and do, but that was amazing, to do a few days there. And amazing food, you know, really cool city. Again, it's great having a night out that's not a D&B night. So we went to kind of like it's just like a bar, but, you know, playing kind of like salsa and kind of samba tunes and just kind of like disco-y stuff, and you're just having cocktails and hanging out, and you're like, oh, this is more of like a proper night out in Sao Paulo. So yeah, it was that was a great trip. Yeah.
Totally. Go on. You know, do you still enjoy a night out? And if so, when was the last time?
Not massively. I mean, just because each weekend, I don't DJ like every weekend, but then almost like the ones you have off, you're like, oh, I don't want to go back out to some club. So, you know, eating out is like a nice change. If you just want to go to a restaurant or go and, you know, get some food, I enjoy doing that. But I've never been a massive pub guy like I did when I was in my like 18, 19, 20, when you're like at college and stuff, you go to the pub, but that was about as far as. I've never been a pub guy, so I never go to the pub. And
I guess by then, like already, you know, you were already touring in your early 20s, so kind of going out for you is going out to work in that type of way, and going out and playing. Really, you've always been on that side of the decks in that type of way.
I know, and it's something that I not like hate, but for the whole, even when I was like 15, 16, I was DJing at house parties, and you still had all these moments where you're like, oh, I wish I was just in the party. Everyone's having more fun than me because I've got to do this stuff and worry about X, Y, Z. And same thing now. You look at people just raving in the crowd, and you're like, oh, I want to be there. That looks way more fun. So it'd be nice to be in the party. And I keep saying that, like, oh, I'd love to just go to Ibiza and be a raver at some house club. Totally different scenario where you can just be a punter and have a good time. But there's just never that space in the diary to kind of get that done.
Yeah, totally. It would feel a bit like a busman's holiday in that way. I mean, when you say about kind of worries, what are your biggest worries now? Like right at this moment or right at this time, what worries a DJ break in that way?
In life, you're talking about?
Yeah, just anything. What?
I mean, I think you know, like lockdown and everything was you'd hope kind of like somewhat of an anomaly, but that kind of made it clear how reliant me and a lot of us are on gigs to pay the rent. So without gigs, it's tough, you know, to be in music and pay the bills. But obviously clubs are back open and we're all able to play out and go out again, so it kind of feels cool for now. But that was like definitely like a little kick up the arse, or just like a little. Showing
you how quick, how easy it is to have it all taken away from you.
Yeah. So that's something, you know, there's not much I can do about it really, because I don't massively, you know, I do other stuff like mastering and production and all that stuff, but I don't have any other backup degrees or any like qualifications, so it's kind of music, or like we said, we'll be driving
going back to the van
van or something. So but people were doing that in COVID that I know, where they're like, well, I need to pay the rent, I've got no gigs, I've got to find some other job quickly. And it had gone a little bit longer, I'd probably be in the same boat. But yeah, I think it's I try and not be sort of too, like I said, that I think I was more worried or kind of stressed out in some ways, probably more in my like 30s or like late 20s, 30s. But there's not loads you can, it's I said less worry, more just generally bitter is probably how I am now instead. Or like moody. So I don't know.
Yeah, just the curmudgeonly acceptance that the world is really frustrating and that there are a lot of assholes with way too much power and influence over our lives. Really,
pretty much that, yeah.
It's not a worry. I mean, in that type of way, because I know that you and I have spoken and you brought it up a few times, but we've spoken about it privately because I think we kind of gave it up or started weaning ourselves off it around about the same time. What's your relationship? This was always my tonic of dealing with those assholes of the world and the frustrations and the pressures of late stage capitalism, essentially. But weed was the thing that helped me. And now it's no longer is now to a degree, but I know that, you know, you've mentioned it before as well. What's your relationship with that now?
What my relationship with weed?
Yeah, man.
It's non-existent.
Brilliant. Go on.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
Thanks. I mean, I don't hate it. I've got nothing against it, and it was kind of like I'd seen a comedian, I think it was, talking about alcoholics and saying someone had said to him, like, however hard you try, mate, you'll never drink all the drinks in the world. And that's what, it's like this guy just like necking it, trying to just drink. And it was like, however, and I just kind of thought that it's like you keep buying another bag. There's always another plant. You're never going to smoke it all. And that was always the sort of weird aim of just like more. But and something
going into the worries thing, like the main worry for me would be quite often that little voice like, have you got enough weed? When's the next split?
Yep.
And those little things, and your whole day would be organized around this
totally
mild addiction, but it's still a bind. Like, and I felt like, now after 18 months, like it feels like a noose is no longer around my neck. I don't have to think about a smoke or anything like that at all.
True.
I remember speaking to you, I was asking your advice because I think you were giving it up before me, and I asked your advice on it. Because there were points in your life where you were heavily, it's part of your world, wasn't it?
Yeah, that's it. And like you said, so many of those years of like, oh, there's a drought. Who's got anything? Calling people, just wasting the whole day trying to link something. And then I think that's why towards probably the last like 8 or so years of it, where I had more disposable income, I'd just buy big batches to avoid that situation. But then it's that the more you had, the more you sort of smoked.
Oh yeah, man. Yeah.
So that was the kind of the problem with that thing. So I just ended up smoking a lot because I had a lot, and essentially wasted a lot of money because you're buying more than you needed to. It was, it's got even way more expensive now than it was, but it was still, it's still expensive. So at some points I've worked out how much money I sort of blew, and it's depressing.
It's scary.
I can't remember what it is, but it's tens of grand, when you're like, but I try not be too like regretful, because I kind of think that's what I was into. I had a lot of good times, a lot of social aspects. There was whole social circles around sort of weed and also it was just a different era in the world. Like, you can't smoke anywhere now. It's just almost pointless to even try and smoke. You can't smoke. And to smoke in a club, was just a thing. Like, you couldn't do that for years. So it's almost like that era of it has gone. And obviously you've got all the vapes and all that stuff. And I vaped for like 7-8 years when I kind of quit weed, and it was the nicotine that that kind of tied me over, or kind of kept me off weed. Well, it really was just I was always addicted to nicotine and making really nice tasting cigarettes with weed in them.
How did you find it changed your output? Because did it change your creative processes in any way? Because I know, again, like, my first thing would be to reach to skin up if I was having difficulty writing something or thinking or articulating an idea, step outside, have a smoke, refresh my brain, come back, and that would be the thing that would get me out of so many things. So I've had to find other ways of being creative and getting through that block, because the block still happens, but you just find different ways of dealing with it. So how about you with your creativity?
Yeah, I don't massively think it helped me with blocks. It more kind of helped to stay in the zone, because it would, you'd melt away everything else around you more. So all the like stuff you were meant to be doing, you forgot about. All the kind of, I was meant to go to the post office, I was meant to like do this, all of that, you just sort of forget, and you're just focused in on this little tunnel vision of what you were doing. So, for that aspect, it was nice. And that you might go down a rabbit hole with something for a lot, you'd give it longer, you'd tweak away, you'd explore and experiment with stuff. On the flip side, you can flip that, and it's like wasting time on dead end rabbit holes. And, I think that's what I noticed in the first couple of years, and still now, but I've kind of got used to it, and I don't really remember the before and after so much now. It just is what it is now. But especially the first like year or two was thinking I'm way more decisive in creative choices, and almost like way less attention span. I was like more easily distracted, but in a way you got stuff done and you didn't kind of, it was like less wishy-washy and a bit more like, right, we need to do this, let's get it sounding good, boom, that's it, nice, done, move on to the next thing. I felt a lot more kind of not I mean, I was more organized, but it was just more decisive and kind of more matter of fact, and I think maybe more brutal in a kind of constructive way, almost like we were talking about early on with the Fats sort of thing. It was
going to
like,
say, back to being cut and dry.
Being cut and dry. Yeah. That's not working, move on, like, whatever, don't. Whereas maybe Stoned, you just sort of, I'll get that working, I'll fiddle with that, and maybe you just made more tunes that were a bit more like wafty and kind of maybe more self-indulgent, I don't know. So I was worried for years. That's one of the reasons I never stopped, because I kept thinking, I won't be able to write tunes, I won't be able to sleep, I won't be able to do this, that and the other. And none of that was true. And so many of the things that I thought were good and bad about weed, they kind of weren't either way. And it was just
it was all just in your head anyway, really. Yeah,
exactly.
That's what I thought, because I'd always said it was just like, I need it to stop me telling people to fuck off. Like, I need it to keep my patience. I needed to deal with the general public. It was like, right, okay, I didn't need this to take the edge off. It was actually it was part of the edge in the first place. And still, people annoy me, but I've got way more patience now. I don't rely on THC quite
Interesting.
near as much as I used to. And that was my main thing for not giving it up for years. It's like, no, I need this to survive as a human being and deal in normal society. Turns out I didn't at all, really. But like you, I still, I still savor all of the positives and great things.
Yeah, and I think
amazing music.
It should be legal here. I was amazed when they legalized stuff in America. I couldn't believe that
we would be behind on that.
That we would be behind that, or just knowing how. Obviously, there's massive liberal and conservative kind of sections there, but I was amazed that the kind of conservative people would let that through in America. And I think it's, I almost gave up around the time that just happened. So I've obviously been in like the shops over there, but I think that was all since I quit, and it was depressing because you're like, wow, I would have just flipped out seeing this stuff back in the day. But also, obviously, I went to Amsterdam loads and Holland a lot, so I'd kind of, and I think that was one of the last times I was smoking. Was one of the last trips to Holland, and it was that thing where you were like, okay, like I'm not that excited by it as much as I used to be, and kind of in the end I'd got such good weed linked in the UK. You're like, actually, this isn't really any better than what we're getting now. And
no, I felt let down the last time I did. It was all really expensive, and the cool stuff I was getting over here wasn't even available.
Totally. So
and oils and stuff. I don't want this podcast to be completely about weed. We haven't even talked about your album yet. So go on. Actually, before we go in on Digital World, I've noticed a bit of a theme with a lot of the titles. They're all pretty loaded and very positive and quite progressive. But there's a theme. There's a theme. Even having soul in a digital world, that kind of pursuit is authenticity. Really, and realness. But I mean, is that intentional, or have I just kind of joined some?
No, you've joined the right dots.
Go on. Come on.
So that was I was struggling with a title, and I had a few other titles that were on the kind of short list, but I wasn't totally sold on them, and they were more based down the lines of the kind of original aspects of jungle and drum and bass sort of being important to this, the sort of origins and the kind of like influence and the history, and that was actually what the kind of a lot of my thought about what the album was kind of felt like to me was about. But also it was none of them sort of quite grabbed me either. And when I'd already made that tune, I'd had that title of the tune just as Digital World. It was just a track in the kind of the sort of short or the long list of kind of options, when I had like 20-30 tracks of ones, and that was one I'd made and was like, that track's wicked. That's probably on the album. And then I kind of thought, actually, do you know what? That's a really good title. The lyrics in the tune that the samples from, sort of say what I'd kind of think. I mean, I'm not a super great lyric guy, so I may have got it wrong. But when you listen to that track,
that's great that it's a sample.
Yeah, it's a thing where a website where you can get samples from full tracks legally. So these bands and people, you can put your catalog up there to basically be sampled, and then you cut them in on like a royalty split. So it's kind of almost like what you'd have to do if you sampled it and then paid for the thing, but it's kind of just set up to do
make
things
it a lot
like
easier.
That. Make it a lot easier. And anyway, the lyrics that he said, I think were actually a bit more positive in the sense of like, you've got all this stuff available to you now, you know, in the age we're in. And so it's almost like, be positive. There's you know, good aspects to that digital stuff, which, you know, we're lucky to have, which, you know, I've always, where all this social media stuff comes up, and I'm, you know, not a big fan of it, and people always ask all about that, but I've always said, you know, there's like pros and cons to all these things, and there's lots of and people have said that to me, where they're like, I love Twitter, there's so much amazing comedy, and kind of, if you find the good stuff that cheers you up or means something to you, then great, you know. It's kind of how you use it, really, and I guess not letting it use you too much. But
because I didn't want to kind of, because I've asked you about that in other interviews, and that's something that I really respect, is the fact that you don't have very much social media footprint in any way. I mean, obviously there's Symmetry has a page, but you might have somebody else running that for you anyway. But I think the main takeaway from anything that I would ask you about social media is basically an envious thing, because I can't even imagine life without it. Because, you know, without, you know, making content, I need it to get stuff out. And my favorite thing is making it. I've got 3 or 4 huge things to be sharing, videos that I've made, podcasts, radio shows. But the idea of making little clips and posting about it and spending time online and thinking about the words that go with it, it's just a drag. And I know that I'm not alone. Every other musician thinks like that. And so, but it has to be done, and we all find our own ways of doing it. But I think, you know, you're one of the last people from our generation who's been able to just go, no, I was around before it. There aren't many people who have been able to do that. I think anybody, if you were coming through now, you wouldn't be able to make that choice, would you? If you're 20 years younger, you would you'd have to do it.
And to be honest with you, like, by far, this album's had the most attention put on that stuff. Even though I've got a guy, Hugo, who's really good, who does, you know, all the posting and organising and scheduling for that stuff. And obviously I have to talk to him a lot about what we're going to post. Have we got footage from this gig? Have we got videos for the tunes, flyers? You know, there's so much that you've got to keep on top of. It's still a big part of like the whole process now, which is fine, because it's promotion, and you've got to promote your music and your nights. And a lot of the reason I got those pages initially was thinking, like, I can't have people on this label or at label nights and that they're not getting promoted by the label. Yeah. And if every other label's on Facebook or Instagram or whatever, it's like, it'll be just crazy if we're not. So that's kind of, you know, why it started happening more. And same thing, it's like, I can't expect people that are part of that world to super go out of their way to find this LP that's only available in some basement shop. Like, it, you know, so your choice to not be on social media shouldn't affect the artist that you want to support, basically. So this is the problem.
To have a presence.
To some extent. And just, you know, it was one of those ones where you're like, well, that at any point where I might have hoped, like, oh, this thing's not going to catch on too much, or like people are going to get sick of this and move on, it's like, that definitely didn't happen. You know, that was like around the Facebook time before Instagram. You know, you kind of thought, oh, I don't know, maybe Facebook will just sort of die and people will get sick of that. It's just a phase. It's just a phase, and there's always another thing. And as Instagram will die, and there'll be another one, and I guess that's just going to keep happening. But yeah, just for the record, it was De Robert and the Half Truths was where
right, okay.
that sample was from. But yeah, but again, that's where all these things tied together a little bit. Like you see on the cover, there's these sort of screens which kind of look like phone screens or TV screens on the kind of artwork, and that's sometimes what these gigs look like, where it's just a load of phone screens, and or whatever, wherever you go, that's just what everything is, just a load of screens.
Yeah.
And there's a little dystopian sort of vibe to that artwork in a way, but it's I don't know, it's just playing with a few of those ideas and kind of but trying to take the positive from it, and like you said, it's all quite organic, and trying to keep like the roots of the music featured in all those tunes really was, musically what I was aiming for.
No, and I think you've managed to do it. It's that balance, really, I think, which has been a characteristic of all of your albums, but more and more so that the musicality and the dynamic of it, and knowing when to kind of take things darker, and just a different perspective on, because there's been quite a few break albums now. So does it get harder when you're thinking about that way, that you're trying to capture what you're about, what you want the album to say? The more albums that you do, is that more and more of a challenge in that type of way, or has it become more of a kind of shorthand because you know how albums work and you've released a lot of them now? Is it easier or is it harder when you're thinking in an album mode?
It's sort of both in a way, because what you said, you're right. It's like, that process and you kind of know the shorthand, but then when you go to sort of do it, it's still harder than you thought it was going to be. I think, and you're also trying to sort of one up yourself a little bit from the last one, and you're like, well, it's hard to say better, but you're like, you want to achieve more than you could have done or whatever. It depends what your kind of goal was really, and what kind of album you're trying to make. But yeah, this one's kind of got a bit of everything, and it's got a kind of, I guess, a bit more three-dimensional than just. But there's a lot of vocal tunes, and that was one of the big aims, was like more kind of songs or things that were more memorable, that stand out with a hook,
I think you've always been big with vocalists, though. I think you lend yourself well. You seem to work well with MCs and singers in that type of way, kind of touching back on the Fats, really, where we started, but especially with Lorna and with Liam, and with SP as well. You've got a long history with Stuart. You work well with vocalists.
Yeah, I do like to think so, and it's my kind of favourite thing really to do, and they're my favourite sound or instrument to have on a track. So I think it does more than anything else, a synth or guitar or whatever. You're like, a vocal's the ultimate, sound to have on a tune, and obviously lyric as well ties in with that. So yeah, it was that's where I've got to give them props, because it's like they've done a lot of the heavy lifting with the hooks, the lyrics, the content that they've brought to the table, which I couldn't have done on my own.
I'm imagining that you give them a blank canvas, you would welcome a surprise and just say, look, show me, you would welcome natural ideas from singers and not kind of brief them too heavily.
No, there's not loads of brief of kind of like, hear the lyrics, here's the melody, it's got to sound like Craig David and da-da-da, or whatever. But there's a few bits where I've said to them, this is what I'm going for, something in that style that's a bit like this, and a few vague kind of like just kind of ideas basically, or kind of pointers. And then, if we are doing a session up here, which is the best way to do it, because then you can hone in on little moments that happen and go, oh, I love when you did that. Can we try a few more of them? Or that lyric really kind of popped out, let's sort of follow that a bit more. So there's times, and every singer's different, because some of them I'd say like, you know, like Liam's a bit more spur of the moment. He'll just kind of come up with some other idea and just quickly put that in. Whereas someone else might have specifically written every word and painstakingly chosen that specific word, you know, for that meaning. So they're kind of, everyone's got their different process. And I guess it's just trying to capture the best of them, because then they'll sound the best on your record. So that's kind of how I look at it, is trying to capture the best of them and put that on the tune.
Yeah, I think that's an art form in itself. And in a way, it's like, you know, how they say, you know, kind of hip hop is one of the hardest genres to do, because you need to have a groove and you need to have something that hits hard, but also has all that space for all of the vocals. And, you know, like anything that's kind of minimal is harder, because it's just those, everybody hears those raw ingredients that's in it. And I think when you're, you know, drum and bass is such the benchmark technically, production wise, as you know, because you're right up there at the top, you know, like is incredibly difficult. So to create that space as well and have vocals on, it's an additional challenge, isn't it, really, in that way?
Well, it is. And you're right. This was always the thing for years that annoyed me with how drum and bass went, because the whole idea of it was that it was drums and bass with space for like an MC toasting on top, or like a singer. And once there were all these massive mid-range lead riffs and stuff, you're like, nah, that's not even the same music.
Yeah.
That's not meant to be there. And I think that's, again, what I tried to sort of draw back on was that aspect of like, it's drum and bass. It's almost like a backing track for the vocalists. And they're the lead, you know, they're the lead thing on it. And like you said, you just want a solid groove that the vocals can sit on. So I've always, and that's why I think in the past a lot of my tunes would be like, oh yes, and people are like, it's a nice roller, and it's a wicked groove, and you're like, it's just missing either the MC in the dance, or it's missing that featured vocalist on it on the record. So that's kind of a lot of these tunes are probably just tunes I would have made anyway, but just got the vocal on them.
Yeah. Go on.
And that's kind of, I think definitely sort of Code Red was a bit like that. I'd made that and it was a wicked, just stripped down kind of jungly track, and you could have left it as it was.
But then Fox came in.
I thought, imagine Fox on top of that. Yes, yeah. And so that was one exactly kind of that process.
Go on. Was that done in person? Because I've heard loads of great stories of him being very much a vibes man, like you described Liam, and just like, you know, kind of working in the spur of the moment. I'll always remember my new Lang telling me about Master Plan and how he was just literally wrote them down like on the back of a fag packet type of scenario, really, and just went in, recorded it in one take. And you kind of get that vibe off Fox anyway, really, don't you? And the lyric as well, in that the sicker than COVID line just really stood out to me as well. But was that done in person, or was it done in a much more cut and dry way?
No, that was done in person, which was great. And it really helps, because it's like he'd written something and he came up and we were in the studio and he laid down this whole bit, and I was like, yeah, it's wicked. But I was like, oh, it's quite wordy and kind of like, it's a lot of lyrics. And I was like, with the beat, if you had something a bit more spaced out, that just kind of a different flow. And I was just like, just try something else, basically, where you're like, oh, that's wicked, but let's just see, I know you can do loads of stuff, so let's just try something different. And like you said, he just sat out the back. My studio kind of backs out onto the garden, so he just sat out in the garden and was just jotting stuff down in the book, and then came back in with that one.
Go on.
And what's mad with him as well was he just did about 15 takes of the same verse, and they just stacked perfectly. And I just left them all going together. And normally you'd be like, well, there's like 10 of him just on top of each other. But they were so tight. And obviously you can move everything and tighten it, but I didn't even need to. He was so tight on his sort of double tracks. And he wasn't even trying to double track. He was just doing the verse, you know, over and over. But it was so tight, I just layered a bunch of him up, and that's kind of partly why it just sounds chunky.
Go on. That's amazing.
Yeah.
Give me a few more kind of golden stories that you're always going to take away from the album now over time when you look back over Digital World.
I mean, the Fats one, I remember we'd made that, and it was a different intro, and I wanted him to record on the intro, because that's probably usually what's going to happen. But he'd recorded the vocal on the drop, and I was like, oh, it's wicked, but. And he was like, yeah, I wasn't really, just as we were saying, he was like, I wasn't really feeling that intro. So he just, jumped to the drop of the tune I'd sent him. And he's like, yeah, I love the drop. So I recorded on that bit. And the intro was cool, but and I don't know whether he'd said it or I'd said it. It was reggae, but it had this sort of like country element to it.
Oh, wow.
It sounded a bit like country. And once you kind of got that in your head, you're like, all right, that intro's got to go. So that's where I then moved his vocals back to the intro and then rewrote that intro around the vocals.
Oh, wow.
And played the chords to fit his vocal. And then it got even better. And I brought the vocal back in on the drop because that's kind of how he'd recorded it as well. And it worked both in the intro and on the drop.
Brilliant.
But that's one of those ones where you're like, yeah, it's there, but you can just rethink it. And I think, again, like we were talking about with the weed thing, there's times where maybe you'd bang your head against a wall, forcing something like that. You'd keep that intro and be like, no, I'm sure I can make it work, and just keep like going and plugging away a bit of a dead end. And
Yes.
I think these days now I'm more happy to just go, right, cool, scrap it. In an hour, you can have something else that's probably better.
Definitely. Do you know what? It's really interesting. I can't remember what interview I've done this with, but I think there's an ego thing there where, like, and I've had
That
it
too.
with a feature, and I've spent a week writing this feature, and I know that it could be better, but it's like, no, I've gone down this track and I've spent days and days and days writing it like this. So I am going to stubbornly make it like this now, where in actual fact, it would be quicker and better. And it's all part of the creative process to get you to the final result, is to go, right, scrap that. Let's rewrite it completely. And I think there's a battle with your ego then, really, isn't it? Even if you don't want to admit it, I think sometimes.
Yeah. And there was a few things like that with tunes where you just have to make big decisions, like Don't You Ever Stop. I'd made that because of the intro. I found this sound in this synth, and I was like, to me, I was just like, wow, it sounds like 31 seconds. And that's what I thought when I heard that riff. Someone else had said to me, like, Atlantis, and it does have a Book of Me vibe, but I really thought, wow, that sounds loads like 31 seconds. And that's what I'd kind of made that intro thinking about. And then the drop was totally different because that was this breakbeat, but I'd made the tune in quite a low key, and that was another one where, like, you playing it out, you're testing it, and you're like, I need to pitch it up. But as soon as I pitched that riff up, it just sounded wrong to me, the intro, and you're like, ugh. It's like when you hear a singer pitched up one, and you're like, no, they don't sound right. But I just had to get over that and kind of get used to that needs to happen in the bigger picture, and most people aren't going to notice it, and obviously most DJs are going to pitch it up anyway. Yeah, because that one, and that's actually another thing. I kind of noticed it the other day when I was putting the tunes together. There's a lot of tunes that are 170 and sort of 171, which is kind of slower than.
Oh yeah, like things are creeping up and up. There are tunes that are around 180 these days, which is terrifyingly fast.
Yeah, that's insane. But I mean, yeah, for me personally, I never go over 174 unless it's a remix or something, and occasionally I do 175. But there was a few tunes on there I was like, to listen to it feels better at 170. And to me, that's a great speed where it's like, that's the borderline between jungle and drum and bass speeds. You can have a jungle tune that's 170 and you can have a drum and bass tune that's 170. And that's the kind of, the middle, I don't know what you call it, like the dividing speed.
Yeah, the median.
And from then on up.
Yeah.
And a lot of tunes with hectic breaks, they just sound too fast. You know, you can't, it just doesn't work at that fast speed. So yeah, there was quite a few on this album. I was like, yeah, I'm just going to slow them down a bit.
Yeah.
Why not?
Yeah. Or otherwise we're just going to constantly get faster and faster and faster. It's just inching up and up and up anyway. So don't be part of that race. Take yourself out of that and just do you. And then it helps your sound stand out even more in that type of way. It'll be different because you're not just speeding it up because things have naturally got faster anyway, really, haven't they?
It's happened with DJs, and I'd not realised for years I was playing at about 179, and that's because everyone who played on Technics knows you didn't want to get stuck in the zeros clicking.
Yeah.
So you'd always play it like +3, +4, just so that you were away from the zero. And that's what I did when I got on CDJs, you know, back in the day. And so for years I always just played at like +3 because you're like, yeah, you don't, but obviously the 0 thing doesn't matter in CDJs. And then someone had said, you know, you just start noticing, that's, I think the newest CDJs, you were like, wow, that's nearly 180. And I'd see other DJs playing 182 and you're just like, this is mental. And so I clocked that a few years ago and I came down to what sort of 176, which is kind of roughly where I play at now. In a club, and even that's fast, kind of, you know. But yeah, so that's why you kind of like, actually, I don't need to make these tunes at 175, 176. A lot of them are a bit slower, so that's just another little aspect on that album that's a bit different.
Yeah, go on, that's nice. I mean, speaking of playing in the club, tell me everything now about XOYO, because this is all landed perfectly, like the album and the residency.
Yeah.
That's no coincidence.
It's sort of is and isn't. I mean, the album was meant to come out in March, like a year ago or two, you know, when I first set the plan in. So that's why we had they had the London and Bristol launch nights, and that was originally when I was hoping it would be done by. But then when I could see that with vinyl and all of that stuff, it wasn't gonna come out at that point. That XOYO thing came in, and we were just like, I was like, wow, that could be actually a great point to make the release date tie in with that. And also they wanted kind of themes for the XOYO nights. So you've got the first one, which we did a couple of weeks ago, was a kind of back-to-back all night. So that was me, the Randall and the Source, all back-to-back for 4 hours.
Oh, wow, man. I bet that
which was amazing.
Just a joy.
It was, and we had Carousel and GQ on the mic for that 4 hours as well. So yeah, the whole thing was, just proper. And it was rammed down there, and the atmosphere was amazing.
Beautiful.
And then, I knew for a while I picked this 12th of March to be like, right, well, let's make that an album release date and a kind of album launch party. And some of the vocalists came down. So we had Lorna King and Liam Bailey down there doing some live PA of their tracks in the club.
Brilliant.
Which was amazing. And they both smashed it. And even Liam called me, I think, on Sunday, just going, man, that gig was amazing. Everybody was loving it when, you know, Gunshot Love dropped.
Yeah.
And he was pumped, like, by the vibe. And yeah, he seemed to really enjoy it. So it was it was a really good night. And obviously SP's on a track anyway, but he was on the mic for that set. And I'd said to you, you know, I've done with Kyo, we did a lot of live shows, and SP was always the mic. You know, he was always on the mic for our live things. So he's been there from the beginning for all those live shows. We did Outlook and things like that. And SP was, always just part of that live sound. So yeah, and now we're halfway through. There's 2 weeks left. And this Friday will be Symmetry as the kind of theme. So it's just like a Symmetry night. And the last one is me, 4 hours all night on my own.
I love that. I absolutely love that. And having a different theme for the nights. I mean, how have you found it? I love the whole concept of the residency anyway. And I think it's an opportunity for a DJ to do something different as a curator as well, and really kind of set a vibe and bring your friends in, like highlight the community factor of it, and really celebrate. It's a moment in time where you can celebrate what you're doing. You don't have to travel too far, and you can, I guess, you know, the only thing that's limiting is other people's schedules. You know, when you're putting together and thinking
exactly right.
It's just the other commitments that other people have, really, isn't it?
It's the budget.
And
because obviously there's people like Caliber I'd love to get down, or just, you know, other people, but they're too expensive. Combined with all the other artists you want to book, so and it's a small club, so it just realistically the maths doesn't work out basically. But in saying that, you know, there is enough budget and enough sort of availabilities to really pick a lot of the people I wanted. So I'm really pleased with like who was available to do it and was up for it. And kind of each night has had special people on it to make each one special and to rep the theme that we wanted. So yeah, I'm really pleased with the lineup, and we've got, you know, wicked MCs on every night as well, which can be quite hard again to get people booked. And it's kind of like you said, I tried to sort of almost like look at the people that had supported me and had been part of either the label or sort of my career a lot, and have them involved, and then have these little special features like the live PAs, and the last night's going to be amazing for me to have SP and GQ both doing that 4-hour all night set is just going to be mad. So you're like, that's
a dream gig. I mean, it's like a dream gig. Yeah, it doesn't get much better from a DJ point of view or an artistic point of view to have all that time to really dig into the music and have the two best MCs in the game who are friends of yours as well and know and love your music. I've got goosebumps thinking about that. If I wasn't at a festival that weekend, I would be there. Like, that just sounds like a dream gig, though, for you, really, and a peak of the last 20 years, really, in that type of way.
Well, I've never, to be honest, I mean, other than like back in the day at house parties and things like that, I don't think I've ever been booked for 4 hours. So just on that front, it'll be nuts to. There's a lot of times you get booked, and it's so disappointing to just play an hour. And you've really got to rush through your set and kind of jam everything in just to kind of play what you want to play. So, it'll be nice because you can draw mixes out, you can, play longer tunes, but also really kind of dig through selection and have nice. I haven't quite planned it all out of exactly how I'm going to do it, but just I think you can have a lot more sections. You see that with house DJs when they play great sets, and it'll be like just like a sort of half an hour disco-y vibe, and then it goes a bit sort of techno-y or whatever, and you can it'll be nice to have some sections like that, and kind of and just find all those tunes that you often are like, if only I had time I would have played them.
Definitely. It makes me think of something that TB said in the Drum and Bass Arena documentary about how and he said his favorite DJ is you, and how you could make, and I can't remember if this ended up in the final cut. I had not watched the documentary for many years, but I remember him saying, I'm pretty sure it is on there, I'm gonna have to try and find this and dig this out now, but he said his favorite DJ was you because you could make what would just be a conventional roller in one of his sets be like a peak time, be a real moment in a set in that type of way. And it's finding those kind of understated tracks in that type of way.
Yeah, it's interesting. And it's interesting you're saying, you mentioned him because like Calix is someone I talk to a lot about that aspect of DJing, and we'll talk about playing the same tunes, but it's like, it works so well coming out of the back of this tune, or at a particular time in the set where you might have had a bunch of hectic stuff and then you just switch it into something deep and minimal. And sometimes you get lucky and you just pull one out the bag, by chance on the night. There's other times you might plan it at home and be like, that's going to smash it on Friday. And it's a bit of both. And I'm sure that set, I'm not going to be able to plan a 4-hour set. No. So I'm going to definitely sort of, play it by ear, but I'm going to obviously have to get my record box jammed full of enough music. So I think that's going to be the hardest bit, is actually just getting everything compiled on the record box so that I've got the selection there. So there's going to be a lot of digging and a lot of dredging up tunes as well that I haven't played for ages. Even now, I heard a couple of my old tunes on that last residency that I think it was Jack Boston was playing a couple, and I was like, wow, it's mad to hear these in a club.
Go on.
And I think that's a nice opportunity to dig up some of those old tunes and dust them off.
Yeah, brilliant. Because I mean, this whole idea of a residency and creating a community, as we were saying before we put on record, this isn't a novel or new thing for you. Like, you were part of Collective in the Crofters' Rights and stuff like that. So you were hosting and being part of a community, a really tight community of regular events anyway. So this is, in a way, like, this is really familiar stomping ground or territory for you, really, isn't it?
I guess so. I mean, I think the stress with this one is it's kind of all on me, and that's the bit that it's been, difficult, is just you're kind of like, it's like your name on the door or on the flyer, and if people don't show up, they didn't really want to come and see you. So you're like, that's the, it's like, no one came to my party. So that's been the sort of stressful thing. And then, and obviously you kind of want to book the right support to kind of help you out with that thing. And then, like you said, someone will go, oh, there's Balta Festival on, or there's this thing on that night. And you're like, oh man, that's the last thing we need. Yeah. But it's not a huge club, and I've played there enough to know it's that they've got good entrance. People just turn up anyway and just come in on the night. So they've both been good already, and I think the other ones have already sold well. So that once you got some of those pre-sales, it was like, okay, the stress is over. Like, people are going to be there. Whereas I think Collective was so small, that was like, I think 200 max, maybe 220, that venue. So it was almost, we had the problem, it was always too busy usually. Yeah. And people queuing outside, and it was just so rammed and sweaty in there. So we never had that worry about it being busy, unless it was a really bad weekend or something, for kind of festivals and other things. But yeah, I guess it's that being in the same venue, doing the thing, having your mates involved and people playing that you really like, and kind of being in control a bit more. Yeah, I think are the similarities, and kind of doing your thing and people turning up and enjoying it. So that's pretty cool.
Definitely.
For sure.
Yeah, this podcast then is going to run at the very end of the residency. That dust on the album is going to settle throughout the summer, really. What comes next? This is the worst question. You've got two of the biggest projects that you've done in your career, really. But I'm asking you now, what comes next? Like, I'm already bored of this stuff now. What fresh stuff?
I know. Me too. Well, that's the thing. It is a bit like that, where I've obviously lived with some of these tunes for a few years even. Some of them are like 2 or 3 months old and they're pretty fresh. But yeah, you kind of want to kind of move on to other stuff. But on the other hand, I've been doing it a bit here. I've been refurbing my studio a bit here. I pulled all the gear out and kind of started again from scratch. Just today, doing this interview with you was the first time I've plugged the mic in, and I was like, "Oh wow, shit! I've got to quickly like shove some cables in and make sure I can record audio, because I've really just had the speakers and the computer working since the album was finished. I sent it off to mastering, and then I was like, I'm done. And it's a weird point actually, because normally with the drum and bass and the other music I do, there was always a project happening, always tunes that needed finishing, remixes, and it's one of the few points where I've got 2 remixes that I've got to finish, but they're not like super urgent. So other than those 2, there's kind of nothing else really on the books that needs doing, which is rare for me. And I could just almost take a whole year off from production if I wanted to, in that sense of like, there's nothing that anybody is owed, is like due for delivery, but the bug catches you, and you kind of, or there's a couple of little offers and things that have come in recently where you're like, oh, okay, well maybe I'll get involved in that. So there's, we've got other tunes lined up for Symmetry from other artists. I've actually, weirdly, talking about it, A-Sides has got his first release on Symmetry coming up soon. Brilliant. So that's really, I think, going to be the first. Circle, like. It does, man. It's mad, and especially when you said that 20 years thing and everything. Yeah. And he's got a really cool tune, which I think will be coming out probably like September, and that's part of it really now, is just getting back into the label and getting out some tunes. We've had some people's tunes, signed that need releasing, and kind of scheduling for the rest of the year for releases. And I've got a few things sort of in the works that obviously there's about, I could almost another album's worth of tunes that aren't on this album. And I went back through them the other day and I was like, actually, there's a lot of good stuff that just there wasn't space for. So I'm not quite sure what I'll do with that. There's remixes that obviously could happen from these album tracks. And I'd already talked with Fats about remixing Natural Way. He was up for it, getting done. So that could be one of the first ones to get done. But yeah, so there's potential remixes. But to be honest with you, I'm quite happy to not have much on the plate for a minute, and just there's bookings to do in the diary, so it will just be nice to kind of just DJ for the year and not. And especially with lockdown, I was stuck in the studio for just a long time. The last few years, so it's kind of nice to not have to be sat in a dark room every day for now.
Definitely. I'm going to let you go out and enjoy the rest of the sunshine on this Monday afternoon, man. It's been an absolute pleasure chatting to you, man.
Mate, it's been really good. I mean, I always enjoy our interviews, and this is, I haven't done one, I don't know if I've ever done an interview this long, so it was a real deep dive and a good chat.
Yeah.
And
a really deep one.
really enjoyed it.